Hi, I'm Alex Cornell du Houx, and I'm coming from Japan here, and we're excited to be on this panel on water security and climate change. I'm president of Elected Officials to Protect America and was elected to the Maine state legislature. And I'm joined by Mariam, who is a member of parliament in Afghanistan.
Thank you for having us here today. It's an honor to be sharing this Zoom conversation with you guys today on this important topic.
And Anna Therese Day, who is an independent award-winning journalist in New York.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this and joining us today.
Great. And speaking of the issue of water security and the climate crisis, it's something I became aware of when I was in the Marine Corps and deployed to Fallujah, Iraq back in 2007. And we were on a patrol, and it was one of those days where it was so hot, if I touched my rifle, it felt like grabbing a bunch of coals. And then suddenly a roadside bomb hit my Humvee. Fortunately, we were very quick on reactions, and as the dust settled, we managed to catch the assailant, tied him up, put him in the back of a Humvee, and then started the court in the area and did our investigation. And what we found was he was just a farmer who had been paid by Al-Qaeda to plant a roadside bomb because his crops had failed due to a record-setting drought due to climate change. And this really opened up my perspective and showed me how water security was directly being linked to climate change, and how the actions of half a world away was affecting people all the way in Afghanistan across the Middle East. So I then went back and I got elected to the Maine state legislature, but then they decided to promptly send me out back to the Middle East, and I ended up in Afghanistan. And during the battle for Farah, the Taliban actually tweeted out and said, "We're taking the city for the water." And then we had to fly there and do a community meeting to reassure everyone that, hey, we're going to protect the water. I was just on the phone the other day with an environmental activist who was saying when he grew up in Kabul, he would play in the springs, but about 20 years later, they're drilling over 40 meters just to get water there. But this issue of conflict and water security and climate change doesn't just limit itself to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. The Center for Naval Analysis is saying, did a study that found 70 to 80% of root conflicts are related to water. The UN found 37 acute conflicts since 1948 related to water. And with 5 billion people potentially facing water shortages by 2050, unfortunately, climate change is a threat multiplier. And you can look all around the world. We were doing a simulation and really analyzing what was happening in Venezuela. And even there, water security is creating instability and more threats. As 80% of the population there has no access to real water that's clean and healthy. 80% of the hospitals have no access to water, and there's a 60% drop in agriculture production, which is creating one of the worst migrations of refugees in the world that's comparable with Syria. But it's coming to the US as well, because Saudi Arabia has lost 80% of their groundwater. They're coming to the US and buying water rights in the Southwest, as well as particularly California and Arizona. And they can pump 2.3 million gallons a day in just one place, where they ship that out in the form of alfalfa, the second most water-intensive crop, to feed 192,000 cows. And we also really need to think about how water security relates to our public health. Because especially in the time when we have a world pandemic with COVID-19, 3.5 million people die every single year from water-related diseases. And half of the world's population pre-COVID is occupying hospital beds. Sorry, half of the hospital beds in the world are occupied by water-related diseases. And that's pre-COVID. So this is an issue that's extremely important to address, and it's affecting a tremendous portion of the world and really all of us in some way. But there are some amazing solutions happening. In Kenya, there's a first solar-powered water desalination plant happening. Same thing in the Central Valley in California, and in Maine, you have offshore wind turbines. They float out there, they pop up, but they can withstand gale force 5 winds, grow up $2 million worth of muscles, and even create wave energy in the process. And it's the policies in our political world that will really foster these to move forward, because I was on the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, and we have the tremendous power to regulate what gets into the market and not. That's where I'm going to pass it off to our Member of Parliament in Afghanistan. She's going to talk about some of the things happening on the ground in Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Alex, for having me today. And I want to start off with bringing up what you said. And the water crisis is serious, especially when in Afghanistan, people don't realize it affects the entire world. And by 2030, prolonged drought is going to become the norm over its current cyclic nature in Afghanistan. It's important to know that Afghanistan is mostly agriculture and livestock-driven economy. And the nomadic Kuchi people of Afghanistan, whom I represent, have a direct relation with the change of seasons. Throughout the year, they move along the areas of the country where it's suitable for their cattle and livestock for feeding. In the last decade, a staggering 50% of half of the nomadic livestock has been reduced due to outward migration, starvation, and as a result of unfavorable climate conditions. Afghanistan's climate has been reclassified from semi-arid to arid due to 50% more melting of the mountain glaciers, and these glaciers constitute the single major source of water flow for most of the river basins in Afghanistan. The increase in global warming has also resulted in early melting of these glaciers and a constant rainfall variation. Early melting decreases summer crops, leaving many farmers with decreased products, resulting in extreme economic conditions. Unless the challenge of global warming and lack of adequate water management are tackled, an ecological disaster is already in the making, which not only affects the wildlife and plants, but also the livelihood and economy of millions of farmers in Afghanistan, which spans out to the rest of the world. As our colleague Alex already mentioned, bad economy and unemployment is directly related to the increased vulnerability of the poor farmers being recruited by the terrorist organizations. What this tells us is that global warming is not a very futuristic problem, but an issue that we have to tackle today in order to live in a safer world. Afghanistan, as a water-rich country, still faces major problems when it comes to water security. We are in a similar situation as Ethiopia faces with Egypt when it comes to utilizing our own resources. Pakistan is facing a great energy crisis, and similarly, Iran is in a critical condition when it comes to access to clean drinking water. Both these countries are dependent on the water supply from the great rivers of Afghanistan, from Farah, which directly links to Iran. These countries, instead of funding terrorism to maintain access to their natural resources, need to work hand in hand with our nation to better utilize our resources for the collective good of this region. At the end, I'd like to stress that global warming is not just a talking point for politicians to mingle with. Instead, it has a direct and dire effect on the livelihood of the underprivileged people across the globe. And we must take bold action today if we want to save our planet and literally save lives. There was a doctor, I don't know if you knew him, Tetsu Nakamura. He came in as a doctor and working in Nangarhar, and soon realized that actually helping with the irrigation, he had no history behind it, helping irrigating desert land that couldn't be used as farming land would actually help the foundational problem in the region, stopping terrorism, stopping the recruitment of terrorism, and these vulnerable societies like the Kuchis and nomads are the #1 recruitment agency for these terrorist networks. Thank you again.
Great.
He was actually from Japan too.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be deployed out here, I'll say. And we'll go off to New York now, where Anna is going to talk about a little bit in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you all for joining us and for all the young organizers that put together this extraordinary event. It's incredible what you guys have done, and thanks for your service and leadership year-round around the world on these issues. So for the past decade, my reporting has taken me around the world covering war and civil unrest. Whatever corner of the earth, in each context without fail, there's invariably a climate dimension at the root of each of these conflicts. But this work has also taken me into the front lines of social movements, and it's those organizers and innovators that illustrate time and again that we have the capacity and groundswell of grassroots support to meet the scale and urgency of this moment. So I'm going to share an overview of what's at stake, but also the endless points of opportunities that politicians have squandered over the past decade at the cost of so many people's lives and livelihoods, but that environmental justice activists can seize in this crucial coming decade. So Mariam and Alex both talked about climate migration and climate as a threat multiplier and vulnerable populations that can be recruited and forced into war, truly. But my work touches on those issues, but I also regularly see climate disaster weaponized as a tactic of war. That said, we've seen that throughout history, how economic and technological advancements can be leveraged in conflict resolution. So today, ambitious climate action is likely the most promising path to sustainable peace. The best example that I see in my reporting is in Israel-Palestine, where the control and extraction of water has been the impetus of multiple regional wars and various rounds of failures in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. For about a half a century, the majority of Israel's fresh water supply was illegally extracted from beneath occupied Palestinian territory. This isn't just a war crime, as it is illegal to extract the natural resources of a territory or people under military occupation. And it wasn't simply a plan to gain strategic resources from one nation's people at the expense of another. It was truly a tactic of humiliation. The Palestinian economy, jobs, and exports relies on the agricultural sector. So not only was their own water sucked out from aquifers beneath them and then rationed in ways that have impoverished and nearly eliminated their agricultural economy, but their own clean water is then sold back to them at a higher price. So people go without water to shower, wash their dishes, while 10 minutes away, Israelis have swimming pools, lush national parks, and a booming agricultural sector. So the Israel often boasts that it's made the desert bloom. And when we talk about the borders and the peace process, you can see this from the satellite view. The infamous green line is now literally demarcated with an aerial view between green and desert. Turning to Gaza, in the various Israel-Gaza wars of the past decade, we saw time and again that the Israeli military would target the sewage plants and water cleaning facilities. These are civilian infrastructure with no military value, but huge economic, health, and psychological value to the Gazan civilians that live there. They do this in one of the most densely populated territories on Earth that the UN declared would be uninhabitable by 2020, primarily due to water contamination and scarcity. So for the past decade, the contaminated water has been poisoning Gaza's children. And we've seen similar public health and child developmental impacts as Flint, Michigan, and other communities suffering from this kind of structural violence of environmental racism. But remarkably, amid this grinding humanitarian disaster, the past decade brought technological developments that could change the game. For the first time in history, Israeli desalination technology has reached a point of surplus. This means they could not only afford to be water independent, but they could export beyond Israel, Palestine, and even into neighboring countries. So while it's challenging in such a fraught political climate, we have an opportunity to flip the script. So we know that economic and technological cooperation has been the basis for sustainable peace and prosperity from World War II to other seemingly intractable conflicts. And while I have no doubt that we're going to have to brace in this coming decade to anticipate that we're entering an era of even greater weaponization of climate disaster against civilians, we do have, for the first time in history, the technological capacity and political will of movements beyond the political power of the last decade. So I'm, again, so pleased to be speaking with all of you. And while I am very nervous about so many different conflicts on Earth, we really do have potential at this moment to flip the script.
Well said. What you said about how we do have the technology right now to make that difference really resonates, because being in the legislature, the committees that control the energy that goes to the rest of the public really have tremendous ability, because it's a regulated monopoly to determine where and what kind of energy gets into the market. And that's what's hopeful, because once that quick change, one vote can make that difference to put the clean energy, which ultimately reduces carbon emissions, which reduces climate change and creates better water security for everyone. So really quickly, with the time left here, what gives you guys hope for the future? And seeing, for me, it's like seeing the youth in this panel, particularly mobilizing and going out to vote. So it's really important everyone here register and vote. And make that difference in the political arena. So what do you guys think? If we do this right, where can this lead?
I have a lot of hope in you guys. I have hope in the world. The fact that the youth is mobilizing and wanting to vote for change, and in strong countries that can see, like who I was talking about before, Tetsu Nakamura. He was killed by terrorist organizations because he was dealing with this water issue. So having people who can stand up and raise the voices of the unheard and see what the media doesn't always show us, that people who are trying to make the world a better place are getting murdered. And so more terrorists are being recruited. That makes the world a more dangerous place. And it all stems back down to this water management, water security, saving the earth. Anna, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say that I have so much gratitude to the youth right now that are organizing this and activists around the world. It's so inspiring to see how much organizing and networks have been built in the past 10 years. And I'm so proud to join as an adult activist now. But I want to say that 10 years ago, I was finishing college, and one of the most inspiring things that I saw and that drew me into the career that I have was an Egyptian scientist who had a proposal to make the desert bloom in Egypt. And the plan was to create jobs and for the entire Sahel by employing these young engineers that later took to the streets in Arab Spring revolutions. They have the technological capacity, and it could create jobs and opportunities in places where people need them. But it was an idea to provide all the energy to Europe as well. I mean, it's just this moment where we could be flipping economies and bringing them jumping decades ahead if we can get this technology into the hands of communities that can really use this to thrive and get ahead finally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's being able to protect our planet, our people, our communities, and create future prosperity. And we have that ability to do it now. And it's water is one of the things that we say it, right? Water is life. A majority of our body is water. And this is something that's we're really connected to as a human race, and protecting our planet and animals around the world. And I'll give Mariam you the last word here in 30 seconds or so.
Well, thank you guys. Having very little voice coming out of Afghanistan and being connected to New York, Japan, and the rest of the world, and having a platform like this to voice the people who are unheard, who we barely have internet or electricity over here. So this means the biggest difference, and not just for Afghanistan, but the entire world. So thank you again for giving us this platform today. And it's an honor to be on here and have my voice heard, and make the most vulnerable people's voice heard. Again, thanks again for having me.
And thank you for all the work you're doing there. It's really courageous and inspiring to see. So with that, again, thank you everyone for all your amazingly hard work and activism out there. I look forward to seeing you at the voting booths by mail in many places. Enjoy.